Now we're in 17th century graves of the 1600s of the Tarkhan. This is a large group of the Tarkhan rulers and their families, and here is a great example of not only some of these double-headed tombs, which are double-headed graves, which are very similar to the ones that you will also find in Konya outside of Rumi's mausoleum. So often one wonders if this style came from them to us, from the Turks to us. In fact, there are historians who believe that this design was created here by the Tarkhans, and then it was taken to Turkey afterwards. The beauty of it is, if you look at the quality of the stone, first and foremost, the quality of the stone is not granular, it's very, very dense. The air hasn't eroded it. We're still looking at something that's between 300 and 400 years old, standing where we're at today. It is spectacular in the quality of the stone that's come in. It's not from the river, it has no fossils, it has no hairiness to it. It's absolutely dense, very, very tight, good quality sandstone. The calligraphy that's done in it, apart from the carving, the Arabic calligraphy, you can tell it's done by somebody who understands the sound of the Arabic, who understands the phonetics, who understands the way it's read, the way it's understood, who probably understands what's written. If you look at the graphics, the way it's laid out in each of its boxes, the proportions are all perfect. The serifs, even to date, the serif on the alif, on the lam, on the tashdid, it's all exactly the same as it was originally done. So not only does it reflect on the quality of the craftsman who understands his craft, he understands the material, the stone, and the language, he also has a very refined set of tools. This workmanship is so fine and so perfect, it looks like it's been done by a machine, but obviously it's not been done by a machine. So the Tarkhans had a very educated, trained, skillful set of craftsmen working on these stone graves. As the camera moves around, and you will see the sides, whether it's a chain link or the floral patterns or the calligraphy or the dates on the front, everything on here is so precise, and each of the letters has been cut not block perpendicular to its base, but with a slight angle. It's slightly chamfered. That chamfering gives it this beautiful drop shadow, which you don't see in any of the other calligraphy on the graves throughout Makli till we get to the Tarkhans. So their aesthetic sense was super refined. We're leading up to the Mughals, and the aesthetics of the people that lived here, that ruled here, that stayed here, that learnt and gave and added to the philosophy, to the culture, to the literature. You can see the quality and the intensity of that workmanship, that thought process improving as we come closer to the Mughals. These graves are just gorgeous, and one can spend hours doing rubbings, doing drawings, looking at the proportions between the positives and the negatives of each of the verticals, of each of the horizontals. We can see how the swirl, how the swish of the longer letters of the hey, of the lam, you can see the lyricism in it. And it's just absolutely spectacular. This space that we're standing in right now is one of the Arghun's buildings. That's what they believe, the historians believe, that this is a monument that was from one of the Arghun rulers. The interesting thing is the Arghuns didn't rule for very long, and there aren't very many other buildings by them. So one by default assumes that this is an Arghun construction. What I love about it so much, even though we may not have the history and the fixed dates and any of the tactile information, is if you look at the style of this building, it's completely different to anything we've seen before, and it will be totally different to anything that we will see in the future as we move down to the southern end of Makli. What's interesting is it has 4 doors. You will notice that it has 4 entrances. All the other places have had 1 entrance, and then there's 1 exit, or it's the same entrance to exit. This has 4 entrances. It's not a rectangular frame. It's not a rectangular footprint or a rectangular plan. It's a square plan. And in the corner of each of these squares where I'm standing are these gorgeous arches that are actually carved into the stone. If one was to look carefully at the detail of how that stone is carved, the little edge of the arch where it springs from the bottom and follows very beautifully like a fountain all the way to the top, and on the other side, each of the corners does this. There is no ornamentation, there is no decoration. There's no surface detail of craftsmanship. It's all entirely in the structure of this building. Each corner has a similar chamfered arch. And if we join the lines between here and the other end of the 2 feet of the arch, it sits right bang in the middle of the door on the outside. And each of these does the same, which essentially shows us that there's a square in plan in one direction and there's another square that's been turned 45 degrees on top of it to give us this movement. That same set of squares is then rotated once more to give us the octagonal roof section. That's the only place where there's a tiny little border of decoration. Even those are 4-cornered flowers. There's nothing elaborate about this except for the beauty of its inherent structure. It's unique, it's innovative, it's forward-thinking, and it almost has influences of modern architecture. When we look at Louis Kahn's work, or we look at Mies van der Rohe's work, or even Corbusier's work in the 1920s, 1930s, this is the kind of minimalist, modernist work they were bringing forth into civilization, into contemporary architecture. This man, the engineer, the architect for this building, did it, one assumes, in the 15th century, so potentially 500 years ahead of his time. I mean, he was a really forward-thinking genius. And unfortunately, even though he may have promised his patron that I will give you something that's going to be creative and unique and different to all the others, the work he produced might have been so radically different to anything else that was happening in the region, fashion-wise, in terms of funerary architecture and the style of it, the fashion of it, the language of it, which was evolving by maybe 20 or 30% in every 100 years. He gave them something that was 500 years ahead of its time. That's pretty radical. And because we don't see any more of his work, there's a good chance that he was either asked to leave or something worse happened to him, because we don't see anything like this. This building is so subtle, it's so elegant, it's so graceful, it's so completely modernist that even the gentleman who's buried here right in front of me potentially sits in the center of this building as a concept. If we flip what you see above, underground, that gives you a perfect cube. So it's the perfect square in front of us, perfect square in the second set of doorway, chamfered arches like these, and then we reflect the same thing underground. We get a perfect cube from all 4 sides where the ruler who's buried here or the nobleman who's buried here would float right in its very center of its X and Y axis. It's absolutely spectacular, and you can sit here and stare at this for ages. It just keeps revealing its mystery gradually, minute by minute by minute. Even if one looks at the stones, you can see the quality of the stone will change. Some of it is more porous, more open to wind erosion. Some of it is finer texture, denser, better quality stone from potentially further away. Some of the stone is black, which means it has magnesium in it. Some of the stone is red, which shows that it has ferrous oxide in it. So there's some stone that's iron infused, some magnesium infused, some with a blue-green tinge has copper in it. Then one wonders why they're all different sizes. So the stones are different sizes, they're different colors, they're different qualities and textures. There's a good chance that the patron said, well, you know, I'm going to run a risk with a new designer, with a new architect, with a new engineer. How about I give you access to leftover materials from a quarry and you show me your creative talent, you show me your genius and do something with it. And he said, no problem, sir. Here's what I can do. And he's created this absolutely magnificent piece of design, way ahead of its time. And really one piece that I wish we would come back and spend more time looking at, studying, drawing, doing sections, creating plans, and really understanding the thought process behind the engineer who put this piece of magnificent poetry together.